I often encourage leaders to leverage the coach approach when developing their teams. The coach approach is basically a practice of leveraging the power of questions when developing your team members, such that anytime they have a problem or a challenge, instead of telling them what to do, you ask them a question. And by asking questions, you help them think for themselves, build connections, and gain their own insights that they feel a greater sense of ownership for, and therefore experiment with them until they get to an optimal solution. Using a coach approach often works wonders for a team that wants to work optimally and leverage everyone's potential. There are, however, some limits to when coach approach may not be the ideal solution. This video is specifically about those 4 conditions when it's better to tell than lean on questions. So let's dive in. The first condition is about the receptivity level of the person you're speaking with. And what makes someone receptive or not is their emotional state. Are they experiencing positive or negative emotions? More likely than not, if they are in a positive emotional state, they will have greater open-mindedness to receive what you have to say, to engage with that information, and to do the thinking work that a question triggers. If they're in a negative affective state, they are probably more likely to be on the edge and not so open to engaging with the question, especially if the question has any inclination of threatening their self-worth or their knowledge. Besides the valence, the positive or the negative affect of an emotion, what equally matters is also the intensity. And we often refer to this intensity of emotion as arousal. And the higher the intensity or the arousal for somebody, the lower their capacity to engage with questions. Think about a significant organizational change or a major project launch or a situation where somebody is being judged or there's performance evaluation at stake. All those situations often not only increase our negative affect, we're stressed or at least anxious. A little bit of anxiety is not bad, it is a sign that we care. But the higher the intensity of that anxiety or stress or worry, the lesser our capacity to process that information and engage with a question. In fact, a few years ago, there was a marketing professor from Boston College who was curious about the impact of questions and the conditions under which people respond well to questions or not, even though he was looking at ads. You are familiar with those. Got milk? Are you a PC or a Mac? So he was curious to see, does it make a difference in how people engage with ads that use statements versus questions? What he found was that if you were highly aroused, you tend to want clear information. You want to know exactly what's going on. If in that situation, someone's asking a question which is adding some level of ambiguity to the situation, that actually increases the stress level. So because he was looking at the marketing side of things, what he found is that under high arousal condition, the statements led to more purchases than the questions did. When we apply that insight back on to a regular work context, and you think of those conditions that I talked about, the significant change initiative, something that impacts someone's personal job evaluation or performance evaluation, any situation where there is a high intensity of emotion, especially the negative emotion, people's capacity to deal with processing the questions significantly reduces. I don't have empirical research that backs it up about the regular circumstances, but I think if we apply the lesson from the marketing research over to general practice, I would invite you to be more careful under those conditions to use clear statements rather than ask questions. The second condition worth considering is also external to you. So the first one being the receptivity level of the person. The second one is about the social norms of where you're working. And if you're working in a global context, especially with cultures that have high power differences, such that these are cultures where there are set expectations of power distance between people in authority, leaders, and subordinates, there are some social norms and expectations of how you will behave. And very often the expectation is you will tell me what to do as compared to ask me. because that can be perceived as a test. You want me to figure out the right answer, not you believe there is only one right answer. I know it's an assumption, but there are many documented examples from cross-cultural research that talks about the consideration of much more clear conversation, being directive, not confusing the teams because they have their own communication norms, and not relying on questions without providing the context of if you decide to go down that path. So the social norms and respecting the communication norms can go a long way in you being effective and not being seen as a trickster while you're using questions when you could be giving clear directions. The third condition is where a leader poses a question creating an illusion of choice, but it's just that, an illusion. Now take, for example, a leader walks to their best performer and says, we have this new exciting project coming up. We were really thinking of you. What do you think? Would you be able to lead this project, or do you have a lot on your plate? Now, if the leader genuinely wanted to know that answer, absolutely, this is a wonderful demonstration of I trust you, but you have the final choice of whether you want to work on this project or not. But if that is not the case, and the leader has already made up their mind, or they're really hoping that he or she says yes, then that's not a true choice that you're offering this person. Maybe by asking a question, the leader is thinking, that's a polite thing to do, and it's the best way I can share this information with the employee. But that's not a true choice, especially if the person says no. The leader feels disappointed and perhaps worse yet, angry, because a person said no to their very polite choice. In this example, the leader has created miscommunication and perhaps a false sense of autonomy for the employee. Imagine when the employee finds out that their input actually has no weight in the final decision of whether they will be required to take on the project or not. And it also creates confusion because here, before answering to the leader, the employee walks away thinking about, okay, how will I manage my workload? And realizing after all that extra time spent evaluating and coming to an informed decision why they don't have the capacity to take on this new project, they go back to the leader and the leader says, actually, you know what, you are the best person and I need you to do this. For someone who is busy, someone who is a high performer, someone who wants to be valued and be seen as an autonomous partner, you have just wasted their time in trying to come up with this informed decision, which really was not a decision at all. And in so doing, you have depleted the trust that the person had in you and in the process. So in situations where you have made up your mind, or even if there is absolute rationale of why you think this is the best choice, don't present it as a choice. Let that person know why you need them to lead this project. Provide the context. But it reduces the frustration of the employee after you take them down a path of asking a question when you don't really want that answer. The last condition definitely borrows from the third condition, but it is an expansion. This is where I really invite you to consider your intention in posing a question and see how you decide to implement that intention in action. So there are 5 types of questions that really are not effective questions for the most part. The first category is a closed-ended question, basically a yes or no response. Imagine you attended a presentation by one of your team members, and how you open up your feedback is by saying, you don't like doing presentations very much, do you? Now, technically, that's 2 possible answers. Yes, I do like doing presentations, and the other is no, I don't. But yes and no questions don't really offer anything valuable. They are not informing the thinking process. They don't move the conversation forward. So if you can, avoid asking the closed-ended questions. If anything, convert it into an open-ended. So what do you like about giving presentations? Now, if the person says, well, actually, I don't like giving presentations, they will correct what you have assumed, which actually is the second set of categories, which is leading questions. The leading question in this case, when you say you don't like presentations, do you? There is a presupposition that
the person doesn't like presentations. So before their answer, they may get stuck on this idea that, what made you think I don't? Or, oh my God, isn't that apparent? But it's really, again, not helpful because it's not an open-ended question. So if you can't frame an open-ended question, avoid the close-ended or leading questions. The other category is when you ask rhetorical questions. Imagine you've had so many conversations with this colleague about how much they don't enjoy presentations. And then you go ahead and say, you don't like presentations, do you? What is the value? It's not even a social lubricant of a question to dive into giving feedback or have a useful conversation of what could be done differently. So close-ended question, yes, no. Leading questions where you are presupposing a certain assumption, and rhetorical questions, which is almost making an assumption and making that statement as a question where there's no answer needed. These are not useful uses of question. The last one is about a logical fallacy. Logical fallacy occurs when an argument's premise depends on or is equivalent to the argument's conclusion. So an example of that would be a loaded question. So imagine in the same situation you say, I know you don't like presentations, but when did you stop putting any effort towards doing a good job? The problem with that question is that you're assuming that the person did not expend any effort in preparing a good presentation, doing a good job on the presentation. That is an assumption you're making, and now the person is put in a situation where they're defending their stance. It almost aggravates the assumption that has been made because the question is based on this assumption as if the assumption was true. It's not a helpful conversation. Another loaded question I see a lot on the teams is, why do you always make decisions without consulting the team? Now this assumes that you don't consult with the team, that you had every intention to make the decision by yourself, giving no benefit of the doubt of the conditions under which, if the person actually made the decisions independently, then what were the reasons that led that person to make that decision? For teams, relationships, even one-on-one, using questions such as this really hurts the foundation and trust in the relationship. So you may think you're doing a good job by asking that question and opening, it's not a closed-ended question, but because of the assumptions embedded in it, you really are not setting up the conversation to be successful or productive. Now, as much as I am a huge proponent of the coach approach, encouraging and inviting people to leverage the power of questions, I think these 4 conditions really warrant a thoughtful consideration about the times when questions are not the most appropriate choices, where statements or being clear can make a big difference in making sure that the relationship and the outcomes are effective. I hope that was useful for you. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and stay tuned for more content. Thank you for watching.